Serial killers, the likes of Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and the Zodiac Killer, are known to be utterly remorseless. Lacking empathy and any kind of regard for laws and social norms, the behavior of these psychopathic criminals is utterly unpredictable. One would think that moments before execution, even the worst of criminals and serial killers would feel remorse and regret for the actions that brought them to death. But do they actually seek forgiveness in their last moments or continue to act detached and psychotic?
Retaliation for taking my life like this and getting rich off it all these years in total pathological lying. Yeah, thanks a lot. I lost my fucking life because of it. Couldn't even get a fair trial. Couldn't even get a fair investigation or nothing. Couldn't even have my appeals right.
In order to better understand the criminal mind and the psyches of these depraved men and women, let's have a look at the famous last words of 10 of the world's most dangerous serial killers right before they were laid to rest for their crimes. Killer number 1, Jeffrey Dahmer, who said, "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Monster and the Milwaukee Cannibal, uttered these words after being incarcerated for 16 terms of life imprisonment. This American killer was found guilty of the murder and dismemberment of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991, in addition to a number of other offenses that included cannibalism and mutilation. This quote highlights his nihilist worldview. Shortly after this quote, he was bludgeoned to death by a fellow inmate in 1994. He did not make a sound as he was assaulted. Killer number 2, Marcel Patia, who said, "Gentlemen, I have one last piece of advice. Look away. This will not be pretty to see." Although the total number of his victims remains unknown, the French doctor Marcel Patia was suspected of the murders of around 60 men and women during his lifetime. During World War II, an investigation into his residence was conducted after neighbors reported a foul stench coming from his abode. Police found the remains of 23 people in the basement of his home. It was revealed that Patia lured Jews into his house by promising them a safe passage from France to South America. Then he stole their belongings, murdered them, and burnt their bodies. As punishment for his crimes, Patia made this proclamation before being beheaded on May 25, 1944, indicating his thoughtless attitude towards death and the loss of life. Killer number 3, Peter Kürten, who said, "Tell me, after my head has been cut off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from my neck?" Peter Kürten was a German serial killer and arsonist, who was also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf. Kürten confessed to 79 offenses, and was charged with 9 murders and 7 attempted murders, which included child victims. Before being executed by guillotine for his crimes, Kürten displayed his bloodthirsty nature by asking the prison psychiatrist this question. When the doctor told him that his ears and brain would probably function for a few seconds after the blade hit, Kürten said, "That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." Killer number 4, Carl Panzram, who said, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I can hang a dozen men while you're screwing around." The American serial killer Carl Panzram seemed to take crazed pleasure in his killing, saying of one disemboweled victim that his brains were coming out of his ears when I left him, and he will never be any deader. In a confession to one of the murders, Panzram expanded on the charges and implicated himself in even more killings, saying, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings, I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all these things, I am not in the least bit sorry." In response to this remorseless confession, Panzram was given a 25-year sentence and the death penalty. before being hanged on September 5, 1930, as the noose was put around his neck. The killer spat in his executioner's face and said, "I wish all mankind had one neck so I could choke it," before uttering this quote as his last words. Killer number 5, James Donald French, who said, "How's this for a headline? French fries." The American killer James Donald French was a college graduate, a published author, and one of the last criminals ever to be executed by electric chair in 1966. This killer had a suicidal streak. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after being convicted of kidnapping and murder, but this disappointed him. He wrote to the governor asking for a new trial and a death sentence, but was ignored. In response, he murdered his cellmate in prison and was finally granted his wish for a death sentence. Shortly before the execution, he uttered these famous last words to a reporter covering the execution, marking himself as an exhibitionist in addition to a remorseless murderer. Killer number 6, John Wayne Gacy, who said, "Kiss my ass." John Wayne Gacy, also known as Pogo the Clown, was an American serial killer. He was indicted for 33 murders of young men and boys, most of whom he lured to his abode by posing as his clown persona and offering to show them some tricks.
Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now. Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, "Well, what kind of a knot do you use?" I said, "What do you mean knot? When I tie things up?" I said, "Depending on what I'm using it for." I said, "The only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot." He said, "Well, show us what that is." So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, "Well, here, you put it around." It's hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, "Here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it." And I said, "Then you put a second knot in it." Okay? I said, "Then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn it." And I said, "Because it's a tourniquet." I said, "That's the only knot I ever learned."
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Sunday.
Authorities discovered 27 corpses under his house and 2 more under the garage and driveway. Eventually, Gacy confessed to the police that he had thrown 4 other corpses into the Des Plaines River nearby. He was a diagnosed psychopath who didn't show remorse for any of his actions, even after confessing to all the murders.
I have a lot of things that I've forgotten that I can't remember. For instance, I can go back to my childhood and stuff and I still remember that, but yet I can go into the 70s and there are a lot of things I can't remember. The same thing with the victims. I've looked at all of, I don't know if you notice here, we got pictures of every one of the victims here, and believe it or not, for the last 12 years I've studied these photos of the victims, and there is no we have a shot of all of the victims together here, and when you look over at the photos, I have no recollection of any of them. Never met them. And we've gone over this more than once. They're just names and faces. And when you look at them,
the Supreme Court of Illinois gave the death sentence of execution, in accordance to which Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. These were his last words before his death, highlighting his continued psychopathic tendencies even moments before death.
I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time. That's why I always enjoyed clowning.
Killer number 7, Thomas Grosso, who said, "I did not get my spaghetti-os. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Thomas J. Grosso was an American killer sentenced to death in Tulsa County for robbing and murdering 87-year-old Hilda Johnson in Tulsa on Christmas Eve in 1990. He strangled her with the electric cord from her Christmas tree and bashed her head with an iron. In 1991, he killed 81-year-old Leslie Holtz in New York, stealing the man's Social Security check afterwards. An investigation into the murder led authorities to Grosso, at which point Grosso confessed to both murders. As punishment for his crimes, he was put on death's row the same year, and the last words he uttered were about his last meal in prison, displaying his detachment from reality and his own fate. Killer number 8, Jimmy Glass, who said, "I'd rather be fishing." Jimmy Glass was a convicted American murderer. The state of Louisiana executed him in 1987 for murdering 2 people during his escape from prison in 1982 along with an accomplice, and he was also one of the last Americans in history to meet his end via electric chair execution. On June 12, 1987, Glass was electrocuted at the age of 25. When he was asked if he had any last words, he offered this quote, highlighting his nonchalant attitude even in the face of death. Killer number 9, Albert Fish, who said, "I don't even know why I'm here." Albert Hamilton Howard, famously known as Albert Fish, was an American sadomasochist, child rapist, serial killer, and cannibal. He was also known as the Brooklyn Vampire, the Gray Man, the Boogeyman, the Werewolf of Wisteria, and the Moon Maniac. Howard once bragged that his total number of victims were more than 100, though it is unknown where he was referring to rapes, murders, or cannibalization, or whether he was even telling the truth. He was put on trial for kidnapping and murder of a victim, after a recorded confession and stints in psychiatric hospitals.
I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat into my rooms, cook and eat it.
He was convicted and executed via electric chair on January 16, 1936. His final words were a clear attempt at feigning insanity, even though the jurors declared him sane and guilty of all the horrible crimes he committed. Killer number 10, Aileen Wuornos, who said, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with a rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th. Like the movie, Big Mother Ship, and all. I'll be back." Aileen Wuornos was the first female American serial killer. She killed 7 men in Florida while she was working as a prostitute, claiming that they had raped or attempted to rape her. She was convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of these murders, following an investigation by authorities.
I have to come clean and cleanse my spirit in the name of Jesus Christ. So I have to come clean and tell the world the lies that went on through my mouth. I mean, now prosecutors and cops.
And that you killed 7 men.
Huh?
That you killed those men in cold blood.
Yeah, and I got to come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery. As they said, they had it right. A serial killer.
On October 9, 2002, Wuornos was brought into the death chamber. She had KFC as her last meal. These were her last words before being executed by lethal injection, which represent her scattered mental state and utter disconnect from reality.
Do you want to die? You want to?
Oh man, if I was to leave this planet, it wouldn't be no big deal to me, because this is a wicked, wicked world. Wicked world. Those were the last words of 10 serial killers from around the world.
Learning from these past examples of depravity can enable us to better understand the criminal psyche and be better equipped to deal with such characters in our society. A society which, we now know, has a dark side.